The book Christians on the Oregon Trail describes the lives and labors of those who were part of the Restoration movement during the time when settlers were first trekking across the continent to the Oregon Territory. These early pioneers faced many challenges in the Pacific Northwest, and as these settlements grew, efforts were made to spread the gospel among those who were arriving in that area. One of the men who endeavored to preach in Oregon during this time was A.L. Todd. In the book previously mentioned, the author presented a picture of this man's labor. A.L. Todd traveled far and wide in pursuit of souls for Christ, and often his audiences were very small. On one preaching tour through Coos County, he sent word ahead that he would be preaching at Burton Prairie Schoolhouse. It was a rainy afternoon in the wintertime, and only 4 persons came out to hear him preach. All 4 of his hearers were men, and none of them had thought to bring any matches for the candles. There was not enough time for any of the men to return home, so Todd began preaching in the fading light of a winter evening. The schoolhouse was cold, damp, and dark, and as he preached, the darkness deepened. When we think of the old pioneer preachers, we may imagine them preaching before a large crowd of attentive individuals, much more attentive than people today. And at the close of the sermon, many would respond to the invitation, and dozens or more would then be baptized in a nearby river. This did happen on various occasions, but there were also plenty of meetings like this one, in which just a few individuals even came to hear the gospel message. It can sometimes be discouraging to preach for smaller audiences. We want more people to hear the gospel and are disappointed that there are not more who are interested in listening to the message being preached. However, we never know the good that comes from even these small gatherings. Notice what came of this small gathering when A.L. Todd preached on this cold, dark winter evening. He therefore preached the light of the gospel in the darkness of that winter night while the rain fell outside, wrote his daughter, his voice being all that could be distinguished. One of the 4 hearers obeyed the gospel soon after that experience, and he developed into a song leader and a gospel preacher. Several years later, he told Todd's daughter about the sermon in the dark. That earnest voice coming out of the darkness that night, I could not resist, he admitted. And if ever any good comes from my work in the preaching of the gospel, it will be on account of that sermon delivered in the dark in that little old schoolhouse at Burton Prairie. A.L. Todd had no way of knowing the future results of his efforts on this occasion. Yet the Lord does not place the responsibility upon us, those who preach and teach, to ensure results. Paul told the church at Corinth, I planted, Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. Jesus told his disciples of their upcoming work in the fields that he said were white for harvest. He said, for in this case the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap for that which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor. His apostles were going to see the results of this harvest, but those other laborers that Jesus mentioned worked and prepared the minds of the hearers without ever seeing the fruits of their work. We may never see the results of our labors in the gospel in this life, but we must never let that discourage us. Instead, we need to keep spreading the gospel and have the attitude of A.L. Todd. A.L. Todd continued to ride his circuit in southwestern Oregon for more than 30 years. No weather was too severe, and no appointment was too far, if at the end of the trail there were a few people hungering to hear the gospel of Christ. If we have opportunities to preach before large crowds, it's certainly good to take advantage of those opportunities. But let us never disregard the small assemblies, home Bible studies, and other such gatherings where only a few are present. Our job is to plant and water the seed of the gospel. Regardless of whether we're planting or watering among a large or small number, God is still able to give the increase.